You know, a lot of us probably think that living a long, healthy life mostly comes down to just winning the genetic lottery, right? Well, a landmark piece of research called the Danish Twin Study completely shattered that assumption. They actually found that only about 20% of how long the average person lives is dictated by our genes.
So if you do the math, that leaves a staggering 80%. And get this, that remaining 80% is entirely determined by our lifestyle and our environment. It's a complete paradigm shift. It essentially means the vast majority of your health span is actually within your control, or at the very least, within the control of the environment you happen to live in.
So let's really dive into this. Welcome to this explainer. Today, we are going on a super fascinating journey to unpack exactly what makes up that 80%. We're going to start with a big macro view, exploring global geographical hotspots where people live the longest. Then we'll zoom all the way down to the microscopic level of your gut bacteria. And finally, we'll zoom back out to see how public policy and the way we literally design our cities might be the ultimate key to human longevity.
Let's kick things off with Act 1, the macro view, looking at global hotspots.
We need to shift our focus to the real-world environments where people are already living incredibly long, healthy lives. Through a National Geographic expedition, researchers identified 5 demographically confirmed areas where people reach age 100 at 10 times the rate of the United States. No way, right? 10 times. They dubbed these the Blue Zones. You have Loma Linda in California, Nicoya in Costa Rica, Sardinia in Italy, Ikaria over in Greece, and Okinawa, Japan.
So, obviously, you have to ask, what do these 5 vastly different cultures actually have in common? Well, researchers distilled their lifestyles into 9 evidence-based common denominators, which they call the Power 9. And what's really fascinating about these habits is honestly what they lack. The world's longest-lived people do not pump iron, they don't run marathons, and they definitely don't join gyms. Instead, they move naturally, meaning they live in environments that just constantly nudge them into movement. They eat a plant-slant diet, heavily based on beans and whole grains. And absolutely crucially, they prioritize deep social bonds. That means belonging to a faith-based community, putting loved ones first, and maintaining what they call the right tribe.
To really wrap our heads around the sheer power of this environment, look at the completely unforgettable story of Stamatis Moretus. He was an immigrant living in the U.S. who got diagnosed with terminal lung cancer at age 66. Instead of sticking around for treatment, he just moved back to the blue zone of Ikaria, Greece, basically to live out his final days with his parents. And he just integrated into the local ecosystem. He was breathing the air, eating that Mediterranean diet, planting a garden. Decades later, the guy was still alive, cultivating a vineyard. When someone asked him his secret, he literally just said, "I just forgot to die."
All right, moving right along to Act 2, the micro view, where we get into the actual science of aging.
Now, we aren't just relying on beautiful anthropological anecdotes here. To validate these geographical phenomena, a massive 2025 systematic review analyzed clinical data from roughly 25,000 participants aged 50 and older. So this gives us an incredibly credible, hard, empirical look at how these lifestyle interventions directly impact the aging process.
When you look at how this meta-analysis translates into real-world impacts, the clinical outcomes are just staggering. For instance, basic preventive healthcare, like routine checkups, cut undiagnosed chronic conditions by a massive 40%. Meanwhile, actually adopting a Mediterranean diet showed a 22% reduction in cardiovascular disease risk and significantly reduced cognitive decline. This perfectly mirrors that plant slant observed in the blue zones, but now we have the hard clinical data to back it up. And remember that right tribe habit from the blue zones? Well, in Okinawa, they formed these groups called moais. Basically, groups of 5 friends committed to each other for life for emotional and financial support. And wouldn't you know it, the clinical data proves exactly why this works. That 2025 systematic review found that community-based friendship interventions and peer support networks lower the susceptibility to depression by an incredible 30%, all while drastically improving overall life satisfaction.
Let's zoom in even further here, literally right down to the cellular level. The European Union is currently sponsoring this project called New Age, investigating exactly how a Mediterranean-style diet makes us live longer. By tracking the DNA and RNA of participants' gut microbes, the evidence shows that this diet literally reshapes the bacteria in our stomachs, fighting off the negative effects of high-fat, low-fiber foods. It's like a microscopic remodeling of your gut. This brings up a super crucial concept coined by immunologist Claudio Franceschi, who coordinates that New Age project. He studies what he calls inflammaging, which is chronic, low-grade inflammation that essentially drives age-related diseases like diabetes and Alzheimer's. So the big takeaway here is that smart, preventative nutrition actively manages this inflammaging. It allows people to stave off biological decline and stay healthy, completely avoiding the need to rely on a lifetime of prescription drugs.
Which brings us to our final section, Act 3, Engineering the Environment and Our Societal Infrastructure.
So, if we know the habits, and we clearly have the clinical science, why is it so incredibly hard for most of us to maintain a healthy lifestyle? Well, because relying on sheer individual willpower is basically a losing battle. We live in a culture absolutely obsessed with restrictive diets and intense gym programs, but the data is stark. Within the first 7 months of a diet, over 90% of people just give up. And that expensive gym membership, attendance drops by 70% after 2 years. Putting the burden of health entirely on individual willpower simply does not work for us humans.
Instead, we have to look at what researchers call the life radius. On average, individuals spend about 90% of their entire lives within just 5 miles of their home. Think about it. This includes your workplace, your grocery store, your kids' schools, your favorite restaurants. If we genuinely want to increase longevity, we have to engineer this immediate environment so that the healthy choice isn't something you have to force yourself to do through willpower, it's just the natural default.
To see if this actually works in practice, the Blue Zones team ran a pilot project in Albert Lea, Minnesota. Instead of asking people to go on diets, they just tweaked the community policies. They built walking paths, they required restaurants to offer plant-based entrees, and they even optimized grocery store checkout aisles to display fruit instead of candy. The result? In just a year and a half, the community saw a 3.2-year bump in life expectancy and a massive 40% drop in healthcare costs. That right there is the absolute power of environmental policy over individual effort.
But, the flip side is just as true. According to the CDC, if you have 6 or more fast food restaurants within half a mile of your home, you are 40% more likely to be obese than someone who has less than 3. Your immediate environment is actively dictating your health outcomes, completely regardless of your personal intentions.
And this is exactly why larger systemic interventions are gaining so much traction globally right now. The European Union's Eat Well project analyzed various public policies to see what actually moves the needle on obesity. And they found that interventionist methods absolutely yield measurable results. For example, Hungary implemented a tax on high-sugar foods, and France introduced a tax on sweet drinks. Conversely, the project highlighted the United States' approach of subsidizing healthy foods for vulnerable populations as highly cost-effective. Ultimately, whether it's taxes or subsidies, the data neutrally suggests that these types of economic nudges are highly effective at shaping public health.
So, the core takeaway from all of this is pretty clear. True longevity really isn't about counting calories or spending hours on a treadmill. It requires society engineering. We need to optimize our schools, our stores, and our workplaces to mindlessly nudge us toward healthy behaviors. The goal is to make the healthy choice the easy choice, and ideally, the unavoidable choice.
But look, while we wait for our cities to actually catch up to the science, there are tools you can use right now. The researchers developed something called the Vitality Compass to help you optimize your personal life radius. It's just a simple 3-step process. First, you take a baseline test to calculate your biological age. Second, you apply the customized recommendations, like maybe tweaking your kitchen layout so you eat fewer calories or adding a plant slant to your weekly meals. And third, you retake the test in 3 to 6 months to actually track your progress.
So I want to leave you with this provocative question to really think about today. How is your life radius engineering your health span? Seriously, take a look around your home, your commute, and your neighborhood. Are they pushing you toward vitality, or are they quietly accelerating your aging? Because as we've seen today, your environment isn't just where you live, it's how long you live. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I'll see you next time.